Thank you for joining us today on We Talk. My name is Lisa Parisi, and I am very excited to have our guest with us here today. Our mystery reader for the month of September is Monique Gray Smith. And people will recognize that name because she's actually the author of the book that all the children and providers have been focusing on this month, which is My Heart Fills with Happiness, which is a wonderful book. Thank you for joining us today, Monique.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I will do another little bit longer introduction. So Monique is an author, a consultant, and a speaker. She's written, I believe, 8 or 9 books for children and young adults primarily. She has a new book that has just come out last week called I Hope. And I will say that we're going to give away 2 copies of that book.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so we will pick someone from the chat who either puts in a comment or a question, and we will send them one of your new books. She's also written a wonderful book called When We Are Kind, which I know some of our providers have also read. And so we'll talk about all those things. Monique is of Cree, Lakota, and Scottish descent. And she has teenage twins just on the verge of not being teenagers. So she's a mom as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to have Monique read our book live today. So of all our mystery readers, they've all done a pre-recorded session, and she's actually the only one brave enough to do it live. And so that's wonderful. So I'm going to turn it over to you to read your book for the children and providers who are online. And then we're going to come back with Monique afterwards and myself and ask a few questions and talk a little bit afterwards. So thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa said, my English name is Monique Gray Smith, and my traditional name is Misty Kwashkigos, which when translated from Cree to English means little drum. And I'm joining you this morning from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Sechathan speaking peoples, known as Victoria, British Columbia. So I'm a long ways from you this morning, and you're joining me just at the end of sunrise. So what a beautiful way for me to start the day to be with you. And I'm very grateful to be with you this morning, and grateful to have woken up on these territories and hear the birds and see the beautiful green trees and the leaves starting to change. And when I was in the kitchen earlier, the moon was just a tiny little crescent. And I just think it's always important to pause and be grateful for the beauty that surrounds us. I mean, this place that we call Canada, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I'm so grateful to live here. So I'm going to read to you this morning, My Heart Fills with Happiness. This one that I pulled off the shelf is both English, so English here, and Anishinaabe, sometimes known also as an Ojibwe. So I'm the author, Monique Gray Smith, and the person who illustrated the book, or sometimes as people say, the person who drew the pictures, her name is Julie Flatt. And I'm sure you have other books of hers because she's got lots of books out. She's an incredible illustrator, but she also writes books, and she's a really beautiful human being. So let's start with My Heart Fills with Happiness. So I'm going to put the illustrations mostly on the page so you can see them, and I'll read off the words off the side. My heart fills with happiness when I see the face of someone I love. I smell bannock baking in the oven. I sing. My heart fills with happiness when I feel the sun dancing on my cheeks. I walk barefoot on the grass. I dance. My heart fills with happiness when I hold the hand of someone I love. I listen to stories. I drum. What fills your heart with happiness? And then here's this last beautiful page Julie drew with no words on it. It doesn't need any words. It's so beautiful. Look at, I'm not sure if that's a grandpa or an uncle or a dad and a child looking out to the sea, and there they see, right? The unicorn of the sea. And that's my heart fills with happiness. So there's a couple pages I'd like to go back to just talk a little bit more about. My heart fills with happiness when I smell bannock baking in the oven. So almost every culture in the world has some form of bread that is kind of theirs, that's unique to them. That when we smell it or we taste it, we all go, oh, it's like it helps our heart feel good. And so for us, it's bannock. And sometimes in communities, bannock is also known as fry bread. In my teachings, we bake it in the oven. And so you can see here, I think this is like either an older cousin or an older sibling. And then these two here and the puppy, like everybody's waiting for the bannock to come out of the oven. Even the puppy, because they know that there'll be some crumbs on the floor. They're just all waiting very patiently. That reminds us sometimes, in life we have to be patient for the joy to come, for the happiness to come. And if in those moments when we have to be patient, when we have to just kind of sit with our excitement of waiting for something to come, if we can enjoy that excitement while we're waiting, it's like this, it just lasts and lasts and lasts, and it feels so good. This one here, you might have noticed when you've read the book before, or maybe today when I read it, my heart fills with happiness when I feel the sun dancing on my cheeks. You might have noticed that this illustration is also the same picture on the front of the book. And many books for children will do that. They'll choose one of the illustrations from inside of the book and put it on the cover. And then, let me just find it here. My heart fills with happiness when I hold the hand of someone I love. So the beauty of illustrators is they can help us to unpack a illustration or a picture so beautifully. So one of our teachings when we go out and we harvest food, like when we pick food or we pick medicines, this here is something called sage. And it's often burnt in a bowl, and the smoke is used to cleanse us. And I know many cultures have similar traditions. But one of our teachings is that when you go pick sage or other medicines or food, you never take it all. You only take what you need and what you might share, but you always leave some. And so in this illustration, Julie has shown us that, right? The adult has some sage, the child has some sage, and then there's sage left for whoever else is coming along to pick it.
Wonderful.
And then just this last page here, right? The question, what fills your heart with happiness? As an opportunity to really talk about it, to talk about what fills our hearts with happiness. And then to think about how much are we having an opportunity to do those things or to be with those people who fill our hearts with happiness. Because it's important that we have happiness in our lives. So thank you for listening to me read My Heart Fills with Happiness.
It's wonderful. Your expression and the extra attention to the illustrations is wonderful. It's a beautiful book. The illustrations are beautiful. It's not a lot of words, but the words are chosen so nicely to reflect
Mm,
upon. And, I'm a very fast talker. And so when I hear you read it so calmly, the words do sink in a very different way. So I think that was an important lesson, even
mm.
for me as a listener, to think about how to slow down and in talking as well as in reading, to reflect on the words. And absorb what those words are and think about it and have the discussion. So thank you. We're
You're
very grateful
welcome.
that you
And many might know this, but the first time you read a picture book to a child or to children, say, this is the first time we're reading this. So we're not going to pause. We're not going to look really deeply at any pictures. We're not going to ask any questions. We're not going to have any wonderings. And then we'll read it another time and then we can. Because the first time you read a book to a child, it's like a spell comes over. And if it gets interrupted, then it breaks that. So if you've never done this before with children and you're used to on the first reading of a book having interruptions, it will take a little bit, but you'll begin to notice it's just like also this illustration that Julie did, right? My heart fills with happiness when I listen to stories.
Mhm.
You can see here, right, the engagement and also
Right.
the touch, right? The importance of when we read as much as possible to have some touch because it changes the synaptic firing in the brain of the
Mm,
children.
amazing. Those are some great tips. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so I guess I wanted to start just by asking you what inspired you to start writing books for children.
I was working at a Aboriginal Head Start for a day. I was doing some training about residential schools and our history with the parents and the grandparents and the staff. And at lunchtime, the children joined us, and the doors opened, and about 33, 4, 5-year-olds came in, and the whole energy in the room changed. Right? But there was one little person who wasn't. His temperament was very different, and he was
Mm,
very cautious. And he was looking through the room until he locked eyes on his person. It's Cookham, grandma in my language.
mm,
And he ran right over to her, and he stopped in front of her. And she took his face in her hands like this,
mm.
and she looked at him with so much love. His whole body changed. And what I saw was his heart fill with happiness by how she looked at him. And so it made me think about like what fills my heart with happiness. And I thought about it on my ferry ride home and off and on for a couple of weeks. And then one day I was in a meeting and the whole book came and
Wow.
not a single word's been changed. So
Beautiful.
that was how my heart fills with happiness came into the world.
And your newest book, I hope.
I hope, and when we are kind,
Hmm.
both of them. I've got I hope here, this one here, and this one's illustrated by Gabrielle Grimard, and her illustrations in here are just exquisite. Both When We Are Kind and I Hope were inspired on a family vacation. My son was actually in Phoenix playing baseball, and we all went. And I just find for me when I'm writing that if my schedule is full, the stories don't they're harder
Mhm.
to get. But when I'm not working and things have slowed down, the stories just come really easily. So
Great.
in that week we were away, 2 books came.
Wow, that's great. Wonderful. And how would you describe the importance of stories, because you are a storyteller, to children and having children come up with their own stories or children hearing stories? What do you think is the importance of that?
I think children hearing stories is absolutely critical, and those of us who have, raised children either as parents or grandparents or aunties or uncles know that they love to hear how they were born, right? They
Hmm.
love that story. They love stories about themselves. So the more that we can share stories with children, it helps them begin to plant the love to learn.
Hmm.
And, those of us who have had that planted in our life or have had that come along somewhere, we continue to seek stories, right?
Hmm.
Podcasts,
Yeah.
books we read, audiobooks we listen to, going to the movies, watching Netflix. We seek stories because they change us.
Hmm.
And so for me, when I write, people say, "Oh, well, what age are you writing for?" I'm like, whose hearts am I writing for? That's how I think about it. And what stories might they need in order to support them in their life? So I am always encouraging families and caregivers, because you have lots of stories about children too. Sometimes when the family comes to pick the child up, they might ask you, "Oh, how was their day?" And you have a story to tell them, right?
Mhm.
Like stories are medicine for us. So if there's ways to encourage children to start to share stories too, that's
Mhm.
and one of the ways, is that game, I'm going on a little trip to the grocery store to get,
Yeah.
right? It goes around to, because if we say I'm going on a holiday or I'm going on a vacation, which I pack, for some children that's not part of their world
Right.
experience yet. So, but going to the grocery store often is, right? Or I'm going
Right.
to get on the bus, or I'm going to go to the park, but I need to bring,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or when I go to the park, I'll see.
Yes, that's excellent.
So, and then that also sometimes, if you do the park and what I see, sometimes it gives you clues also, right? To what
Mm.
else they might be experiencing in their community.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
That's a very good tip. Yes. Yes, I noticed the importance of stories for sure. You do see it, but it does light children up. They love books.
Mhm.
Uh, I always say my daughter, I used to have a negotiation with her every night on how many books she wanted read.
Yes.
If it was up to her, it would be all night. It is. And she does still remember the stories of her youth, and she remembers the story of her birth the way that I told it to her as a very young child. And she's grown up now, but still is very attached to those stories. So
Yes.
um, I think you expressed
Yeah.
it very well in that way. I was going to just remind people that they can ask Monique questions in the chat. If you type
Mhm.
it in the chat is the way that you can ask questions, and then Nicole will read them to me, or I can actually see them. But I will ask you another question, which is a little more difficult if we shift gears. September, we on September 30th, I guess it's the second year now that we have the day for truth and reconciliation. And for a number of years, I think we've been observing sort of Orange Shirt Day and hearing some of the themes that come through that. And so, one question we get asked a lot, because the majority of our children are quite young in our homes, is how do you have a conversation with young children about truth and reconciliation?
Mhm. That's a really huge
Yes.
question, because all of the children, I mean, we say developmentally,
Yeah.
but really their own temperament and how they're thriving and their gifts that they're bringing into the world and how they're being raised influences all of that. But
Hmm.
I think that books is one way to do that. I have this children's book here called You Hold Me Up.
Hmm.
Is a book about truth and reconciliation, because it's a book about how do we foster our youngest children to understand how to be together as humans. You hold me up when you're kind to me, when you respect me, when you share with me. Because what that does then is it begins them to help to understand the disrupt that happened
Hmm.
from 1831 till 1996, when their brains are ready to begin to learn some of those pieces. Their hearts are already developed to be empathic, to be kind, to listen, to be supportive, and to be able to reflect, right, and take
Right.
perspective. So I think sometimes it's not necessarily so much at this age that we may, I mean, it will depend on the children in your home,
Hmm.
whether you feel they're ready for some conversation actually about residential school. But you can say things like, in Canada for a long time, a very long time, Indigenous children were taken from their homes and placed in schools where things that were not very kind happened to them. You
Hmm.
don't have to talk yet about the abuse. Like, you don't have to say those things. They will understand
Hmm.
things that were not kind, things that hurt them, and things that hurt their families,
Hmm.
impacted them for a long time. One of the most beautiful books I think that you can read to children about residential schools, if you feel they're in this place to begin to go to kind of the next level on their learning journey, is When We Were Alone by David A. Robertson and
Hmm.
Julie Flatt.
Yeah.
I mean, together they have just really created such a beautiful understanding for children and for you as caregivers and families to
Hmm.
have some discussions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's very
And,
much.
children say, "Why am I wearing an orange shirt?" Well,
Mhm.
for years in Canada, there were lots of hurtful things happened in schools for Indigenous children and their families. And so when we wear orange shirts, we're saying that I care about what happened. I care about what happened, and I care about what the future looks like. And I want to be somebody who cares.
Yeah. Yes, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Those are
they
great.
will understand that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's wonderful. And I know, we've focusing this month around trying to bring some of that discussion into the homes. I love, your book, When We Are Kind, and the other book you showed us as well. Because when we do hold people up,
Mhm.
it's those themes and words that children do understand, and they understand kindness and how to be
Mhm.
kind to each other. And those are great discussions to kind of bring to bear. We also did a bit of a discussion this month with our kids around why they matter. And so why
Mm.
every child matters. And they talked themselves about why they matter themselves. So it's a
Nice.
little bit of internal reflection as well. These
Mhm.
are very young children, and they come up with very interesting things, which is we learn from them as much as they learn from us sometimes. So it's wonderful. We had a provider out in Kitchener, Waterloo. Her name is Amanda. She shared some pictures with me yesterday of some activities that she was doing in her
Mm.
home, where she had orange hands, and on those orange hands, they wrote why they mattered, and they had a discussion around the residential schools and around what she thought the children felt like and what the families would have felt like,
Mm.
and then broaden that discussion to how what do they want everyone coming into their home, that they are their daycare home, what they want people to feel. So there's this whole
Wonderful.
idea of kindness and bringing it forward that way. So I thought that was just a really nice thing to share from Kitchen.
Mhm.
Is there any questions in the chat? Just gonna try to quickly look through. There's one about specific resources, but I think you answered some of that with some other books that you've suggested, and so I think we'll put those in the chat after so that so people can find them,
Mhm.
which I think would be very helpful. Is there anything in particular, if you think about children today, that you interact with that inspires you about children today?
Mm. Well, I think that, these little ones today, they have lived through a time that has been, I mean, we all have, right, for the last 2.5 years. But for some of
Mhm.
them, even coming perhaps to home care center will be the first
Mhm.
time they've been outside of their home and
Correct.
engaging and being left. I speak of this because my little nephew, this is his first time in a care. He's in a care center,
Yeah.
but it's just been a huge transition for him because he's not used to having so many people around. And if we're
Mhm.
not naturally extroverts, it takes a lot of energy to be
Mhm.
around people. So I think that's one piece is to just be really mindful. And it's kind of, as you said, Lisa, with the reading, like to
Mm.
just slow down, right? That for some of these families, they'll be picking up their children, they'll be getting on the bus or getting in the car, going home, eating dinner, doing baths, getting to bed. So while they're with you, the slower, the
Mhm.
better, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we think that we have to fit a whole lot in, but
Mm.
really what's important there are the relationships. And relationships take time, they take attention, they take focus, and they take us slowing down.
Yeah, I think it's a
Mhm.
very important lesson. It is a good one that the slowdown is important, and there is a lot of action that goes on along families and keeping people busy and getting them to care and getting them home from care. So I love that as a tip to take and really absorb and spend time and go at their pace a little bit sometimes.
Mhm.
I think is a helpful lesson. There is a question again. Someone said, "Thank you for sharing. And do you have
Mm.
plans for other books? And will you continue to write for children?"
Mhm. Thank you for that question, Sarah. I have another book coming out. It takes a while. So, for example, I Hope was submitted to Orca Book Publishers, the publisher, in April 2019. Gabrielle was announced as the illustrator in July of that year, and it just came out on Tuesday.
Wow. Yeah.
So sometimes it takes a long time because the illustrators, depending what medium they work in, sometimes an illustration takes a week.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah.
And so if you have a book with 24 illustrations in it, you know,
Yeah.
that's 24 weeks just for the illustrations, let alone all the changes.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
So coming in 2024 is a new book called Circle of Love.
Nice.
And it's about a little girl who invites us to, it comes out of HarperCollins in New York. So there's a few changes because of it's a US book, but it's similar to our friendship centers. They call them their Indian gathering centers, who invites us to the Indian gathering center to meet all the people she loves. And it helps the young children to understand, the whole breadth of people we can love, which sort of society, says LGBTQIA squared, right? But it allows children to begin to understand that love is love.
Wonderful.
So that book's coming out in 2024. And then in 2025, another children's book called Dreaming Alongside, about helping children to remember that, they do it naturally, but as soon, I think, as they begin a transition into a more regular school format, it begins to lessen. And that's just the dreaminess that we have, whether we're looking at a big, digger, right?
Yeah.
You think about some of the children in your care homes, they see a digger and their eyes just light up, right?
Yeah.
Or some of them, they're just dreamy children because they're full of stories. They're still so connected.
Yeah.
So that one's coming, I think it's 2025. That one's going to come. And it's illustrated by Nicole Neidhart, who did When We Are Kind. Actually, both those books are illustrated by Nicole Neidhart.
Beautiful. Yes, excellent. We look forward to those new books as well.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank you again. We loved having you here, having you read your own book to us. It really does bring it alive in a different way for us and for the children. So thank you for
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Getting up so early to do this all the way from Victoria. We really do appreciate that as well.
My pleasure.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye.